Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to NIAS'18 Day 2. I'm pretty sure you have expected Matt Roper to show up on the screen, our great moderator. He's just preparing for the panel that we are running soon, which I have the honor to moderate. So I'm Admiral Daum, the Chief of Staff of the NCIA, Kevin's deputy, the senior military in the agency. You won't identify me today as an admiral, I'm pretty sure, but the GM called it a no-tie event, so I got no uniform with a jacket without tie, so I choose this. If you can see me as an admiral today, then you had the last blue cocktail yesterday was the wrong one that you took. That might be a problem then. So first of all, I hope you enjoyed yesterday's day one, especially the reception at the end. Special thanks and maybe applause from your side to our sponsor last night, Old Security Defense, Cyber Defense. Thanks for them for hosting that evening, and if you want to give them an applause, that's a good idea. I still see some free seating around. That might be people that we are miss, which have too much enjoyed that drinks last night. But maybe at noontime we will see a more filled room. So it's another busy day with a full agenda. So I kindly request you to stick to the timings and be in the room to join us for the panel sessions, for the keynote speakers, and all that stuff. Also, I have to give you some admin remarks. Always wear your badge so that you can be identified by security. You have an app, you can submit questions. We also have our little cube here to ask questions during the session. So get actively involved in these sessions. And of course, visit the cyber game zone that we have in the rear area so that you can beat with the other ones for the newest high scores that we have seen, good results. So you might challenge them and do something more. I just asked a question, you feel safe and secure? Hopefully yes, and that's because of our security team, up and running, always on duty to taking care of that. And we have a special situation this morning, so I would invite the general manager and our cyber king, which is Ian West, to the stage, because there's a small announcement that we have to make regarding security, and I think we have one of our security team here in the room, so I would request Bob Bell coming to the stage. Where are you, Bob? Come on, show yourself.
Come on, Bob. There is no escape.
Don't be shy. There he is. Ian, you have the floor.
So, ladies and gentlemen, meet my old friend, Bob Bell, who until just a few seconds ago, as a senior member of our security team, was deep undercover. Cover hereby blown. It is a special day today, because today is Bob's 60th birthday. Bob, welcome to the 60s. Life begins at 60. I just have to tell you that Bob and I first worked together when we were 20-year-old Royal Air Force Police NCOs in 1978. Now, at this point, Bob, there's several hundred people saying, I wasn't even born in 1978. There are a lot of stories that we could tell you as silly 20-year-olds, but that's for another time and another place. Now, this is a special day. So how much more special could it be than for several hundred people to join me in a little song? Are we ready?
We are.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bob. Happy birthday to you.
Well, happy birthday.
And I promise that is the last time you will ever hear me try to sing. Thank you, Admiral.
Yeah. Thanks, and Bob, all the best. Life starts at 60. I was just told by the GM that this is the case, so enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we are ready to start with our first panel today, and with 4 excellent experts that we have invited to join us on the panel. And I would welcome if you could join me on the panel, dear panelists. The title of the panel is From Banks to Drones, and that's a little bit challenging topic in order to make that work together. So the aim is that we have a broader look and take a broader look at the cybersecurity environment from different perspectives. And the key question will be, how do we ensure across all the domains that we are safe and secure in the cyber environment? And I think we heard it yesterday multiple times that we are increasingly dependent on what cyberspace means to us in the life. Is it political, is it military, economical, commercial, school, training, and all that stuff. So we are dependent. We want cyber to function, we want IT to function, communication to run, but we at the same time want that to happen properly and not damaging us, challenging us, threatening us. So if we all want online banking, but we want our banking accounts secure. We all want to fly with planes across the world, but we want to land safely. So the air traffic control system should work properly. And social media, maybe the younger generation wants to use social media as the first means of having contact, but they want that safe and not being mobbed by cyber mobbing or things like that. So if you just think from a commercial, political, military standpoint, you will find multiple examples where we want to benefit from cyber, but at the same time, we don't want to be challenged, and we don't want to be threatened by that, and we don't want to lose our data, our money, we don't want to lose our identity. So that's the challenge, and that's what I want to discuss with my 4 panelists, and they will have the opportunity for an initial statement. They will have some questions from me. And then I want to engage with you. You have the app, and I have the iPad to see and read all your questions, so I can moderate these questions and provide them to our panelists. So make use of that, get interactive. It's a short time frame, but still there is an opportunity. So having said that, the cube is somewhere in the room. Also the mobile microphone, so you can use that. So, ladies and gentlemen, my honor to introduce from left to right His Excellence Ambassador Luis de Almeida Sampaio, the Portuguese permanent representative to NATO in Brussels. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
I can introduce Eneken Tikk. She is the Director of Strategy and Power Studies in the Cyber Policy Institute in Finland. I welcome Charlotte Thoms Branfield from Citi Group. She's the Global Head of Information Security, International Standards, and Cyber Advocacy. And I can introduce not the moderator, but our expert from within the agency, Matt Roper, our Service Line Chief for GISA, Joint Intelligence Service, and Reconnaissance from the agency. So all the panelists have a very impressive bio. You have an app. You can look up that bio so that I can save some time being the moderator, not too much extending on their bios, but saving some time for the discussion that we might have. So, an initial statement, you are aware that this might come, and Ambassador, if I might start with you. Portugal, just building the agency's academy in Portugal, the NCIA Academy, the general manager mentioned that yesterday. You're investing a lot. I saw Microsoft, Google settling in Lisbon area. You have the Nova University. So especially education training is really growing, apart from the cyber arena growing all in all in Lisbon. So I'm pretty sure that your initial message will cover that topic. So I give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and thank you for this opportunity. Still a lot of challenges ahead. The main one is, of course, building a capable workforce. And that is really what this is all about. Investment in high-tech equipment, in new technology, will be meaningless without investing in a capable workforce. So everything boils down, at the end of the day, to training and education. And training and education that cannot only be focused on experts, on scientists, engineers, technicians of cybersecurity and cyber defense, but also should be seen as an holistic project encompassing the entire society. And our aim at the end of the day would be really to follow the very good examples that are already out there in many of our NATO nations that are starting with basic school education on cybersecurity and cyber defense. So this very basic knowledge, this very basic awareness needs to be part of our culture and of the culture of our societies. Let me give you an example that I often use in occasions like this one. We have driving licenses because we drive cars, and we are entitled to do that. We have some proficiency to drive cars. Or if we are a plane pilot, we have a special flying license. And we don't need those licenses if we are only passengers, either on a plane or aboard a car. But in the cyber domain, we are all driving. We are all and each one of us, we are in the driving seat. So we need to be entitled to have a license, the necessary proficiency and expertise to know what we are doing. Because nobody is an idle passenger in the cyber world. And so that is a huge challenge, a huge change of paradigm and mentality. How to do that in a way that simultaneously creates interoperability, interconnections, sync and synergies across the board in an organization composed by 29 nations like NATO. We need to establish at a certain point benchmarking, because we need really to make sure that everybody is on board of that plane where everybody is a pilot, and we cannot afford to be measured by the weakest link, because we are as weak as our weakest link. So benchmarking is also a key dimension. And this is one of the challenges for our NCIA Academy based in Portugal. In Oeiras, we are not only extremely pleased by what we are doing in a very coordinated way with the NCIA agency, but also what ACT is providing as not only support, but also feeding the possibility for this academy to be a leading partner in what education and training is concerned. Linking with industry, linking with academia. You mentioned the new university that is based very close to the new facilities of the academy in Oeiras. It is not only that university, but we believe that we could reach out to academia, not only in Portugal, of course, but throughout Europe, and of course throughout the NATO environment. In what Europe is concerned, we have also the expectation to provide a very strong link with the European Union. And that could really be a platform, an excellent platform, a showcase, a test bed for the furthering and fostering cooperation between NATO and European Union. So a lot of challenges. We count on NCIA agency, and I am very pleased to see the general manager in the very front row of this event, and I count on him, as the Portuguese authorities do, in order really to make this project something that could really be cutting edge for our entire cybersecurity culture that we really want to help building.
Thank you so much. I think very important, especially from the training perspective. And I could take the opportunity because I know that industry, to some extent, is also interested in what they can support in the way of training and education. And we have the Civil Chief from Training and Education from the agency, of course, J.P. Marsar. He's here today. He will also sit on the panel at a later day. And especially Colonel Paulo Nunes is here, which is the commandant of the NCIS, the NATO CIS school in Latina, and foreseen to be the first dean in Portugal, running the academy in Oeiras. So if you find it worthwhile, and it will be worthwhile, get in chat with those guys. Thanks, Ambassador, again. Eneken, you have a PhD in jurisdiction. Is that the right term, jurisdiction, or legal terms? You will see most things through the glasses of a lawyer.
It's the law,
but I understand you are a strategic brain as well, so you have a good insight in national strategies and how this links to international strategies in the world of cybersecurity strategies that nations are following. So I'm pretty sure you will give us some important insight in that. The floor is yours.
Well, I guess I start, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. Years have passed since I've been here and talking about these themes. I guess I start by just calibrating a little bit what it is that I'm talking about as a lawyer, because we hear these numbers like from 70 to 200 to whatever millions of attacks on a daily basis. And what I'm focusing on is this question of state-on-state cyber operations. And there are companies or like organizations keeping track on those, and I'd say we have some 300 or so to talk about in the past 10 to 15 years. Of those, 75% to 80 are of cyber espionage. And then the rest are divided between what constitute rather low effects like denial of service and defacement. And then a little fraction has risen above where we see data destruction and sabotage. So that's now the first segment I'm addressing, and I would say that from a legal perspective, what we are seeing is the trend of disagreement about the law. About the law, the disagreement, of course, by strategic contestants in the US, Russia, and other important countries, but also disagreement between developing countries and developed and technically agile countries. We are seeing huge disagreements between scholars, and I think we need to see and acknowledge that there are disagreements between allies about international law and how it applies to cyber operations. I also think there is a very important micro level that we maybe discuss less when we think about how law and cybersecurity interact. Because in a way, this event here is testament of how many countries are currently preparing or getting started or already using their cyber military capabilities, units, organizations, and actually other cybersecurity and cyber defense functions, and something we talk maybe less about so far. So, to talk about these legal trends, I'd say the biggest challenge we keep facing is bringing it all together, bringing together our ambitions, strategic ambitions, national realities, and realities, I would name it, the lessons learned, because I would, I think, push back on some of the operations colleagues who say that we are moving or we have moved beyond protection and prevention. I think for I don't want to say numbers, but for vast majority, we are stuck with figuring out these security and protection guarantees at very tactical, technical, and maybe somewhat routine levels that maybe doesn't sound so good politically, but at the same time gives us really important lessons to learn from. And I'd like to hear and talk more about that. And of course, the agency is in a unique position to see all those prospects, how it needs to come together at NATO, between NATO and the rest of the world, at national level, from nations to NATO.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you. I think that's important exchange that we have, and that's why I think Ian is quite investing in getting in touch and staying in touch with you and hearing that idea, so that this can influence and inform the policymakers at all levels to get that done. So thanks a lot. Charlotte, global head of information security means global challenge, global threat that you are facing, and as far as I learned, you also had have some experience in the financial sectors about financial crime and all that stuff. That sounds interesting to me, and is a separate but common challenge that we face from a military perspective, not in the financial sector, but there is a lot of threat against your interests. So what's your initial view? Thank you.
Absolutely, and again, thank you for having us here. We're at a very interesting period of time where when we look to both private and public sector actors dealing with the range of cyber threats, we're seeing a real convergence of the more traditional threats, such as cyber threat actors and so on, to threats from other areas, such as the regulatory and legislative environment. So for a bit of context as to why you have the internal standards person on a panel talking about how we deter malicious actors and the lessons that we can learn from the public sector, we have to think about the business model of many multinational and domestic private sector companies. So if you think about it from the traditional perspective, so looking at cyber threats from the malicious actor perspective, we do see criminal groups becoming increasingly sophisticated, particularly as nation-state tools are becoming far more widely available. And in particular, some criminal groups have the same capability, perseverance and sophistication as some of the very sophisticated nation-state actors. So we see a real range of threats coming into the bank or private sector environment. We also see nation-state actors moving from cyber espionage to influencing our operations, whether that's trying to steal intellectual property, to give their domestic champions a boost into the marketplace, or trying to disrupt the flow of data. What that means from our standards perspective, and certainly what it means from our business model capability, is we have to understand what that threat means to how we operate, both on a tactical level, but all the way up to the strategic operational level. Citi is physically present in 98 countries. It's safe to say that many nation-state actors are very interested in us, particularly given the current geopolitical landscape. But it also means that when we look to protecting the bank, looking at the regulatory and legislative environment is very important. So when we have divergences or conflicts of law, it means that we can no longer provide or have a global view of what's happening. Citi's network then becomes very fragmented so that we can see what's happening in a handful of countries, but we can't see what the trend landscape is from a regional or global perspective. We also see challenges from areas that you wouldn't expect. So for example, as many of you are probably aware, there's increasing regulatory focus on threat-led penetration testing. This has taken inspiration from the Bank of England's CBEST test. We now have in Hong Kong ICAST, and in the EU we have Tiber EU, as well as Tiber Netherlands and other initiatives. So if you think about this from a geopolitical or strategic risk to Citi's franchise, if we have a nation state decide that they require for part of their banking license requirements, Citi to have a threat-led invasive pen test, and we have to choose a third party, and the third party is from a set list of third parties, most of which are probably linked to the government in some way or another. It then causes us to think, well, are we willing to take that business risk? Because you're essentially allowing a government agency into your network. The whole purpose of a pen test or your red team is to see how far they can get in the network, what information can they get before you kick them out. Now, if you think about that in the landscape of which we're talking about cyber today, that is actually a threat, one, to our business, it's a threat to our clients, but also we know that many of the governments of the other countries we're operating in would have issue with that as well. The other piece is the legal framework. So we've just heard about cyber norms, and I'm sure we will get onto that. But increasingly, private sector has a role to play in that debate. On a very selfish level, talking from a financial institution, protecting the integrity of financial data is key. If the data of FX transactions or our algorithms are manipulated, we lose trust in the financial system. And as we saw in the 2007-2008 very sort of traditional financial crisis, that has very wide-ranging repercussions from governments to regulators to central banks to institutions like NATO, as well as the consumers and other corporates and small to medium enterprises. We have to remember that 90% of mid and large-sized organizations are using digital channels to receive payments, access financing, and to connect with their clients. If we start seeing those channels disrupted and we start losing the trust in that ecosystem, we do significantly weaken both the national, domestic, and international frameworks. So when we look at the challenges and we look at why private sector are increasingly interested in these conversations and why we're looking at it from an internal standards perspective, it's to make sure that we are keeping in close alignment with the evolving regulatory and legal frameworks, as well as the tactical and operational capabilities we have. One parting thought, we have to be aware of a group that we have very dynamic and agile adversaries. And we find that many criminal groups are starting to look at regulation and international standards because that tells them the minimum that everyone's doing. So they know what we're doing. We know what good cyber hygiene looks like. So if we're not looking at those regulations and standards as a minimum and then striving to achieve a far higher bar, the criminals will always be at an advantage. We have to look at risk from a very holistic franchise perspective, because until we understand risk for our businesses and for the public sector agencies, beyond cyber, we'll never truly understand what our enterprise risk framework looks like. We'll never truly understand how much higher and above and beyond the standards, the public standards we have to go to protect our network. So therefore, we'll always be at a disadvantage. So when we have conversations around law, legal frameworks, regulation, as well as the traditional operational capabilities, we do really need to look at that diversity of thought and understand from a risk perspective what that methodology and common taxonomy is so that we can work far more closely together.
Thank you so much. I think especially the risk management approach is important, and I would be interested in the following discussion to hear more about your approach to that, how you institutionalize, organize, or how you develop processes on that. Maybe that might be a good lead-in then. Matt, last but not least, our key enabler for the GISA area. So I think the threat is coming. Cyber in the military domain, we heard it yesterday, has a new important role. So all the work you're doing, you're not the warfighter, but you're the supporting enabler with the tools. So how do we do with bringing up the proper tools in that area?
Well, thank you for the question, and very good morning. It's somewhat odd to be sat this side of the lectern, but it's nonetheless, I'm very grateful for that opportunity, and I'm grateful to my previous panelists for teeing up my response to your question. In my professional domain, inside the Joint Intelligence, Surveillance and Reconnaissance discipline, much of this, and in fact the dialogue you've heard, is very common. In fact, it's probably no surprise to many of you that the cyber dimension is rooted in the very construct of intelligence as a discipline. And many of the practices, the technologies, and the protocols have long, deep roots in terms of how we gather and manipulate intelligence. I would also refer back to both Kevin's opening comments where he talks about cyber as a team sport. Well, ISR, or intelligence particularly, is a team sport, and that pivots to the ambassador's comment about the people. Intelligence operations, whether they be extracted from cyber or another one of the traditional INTs, are very much about the people, and the quality and the training of those people is fundamental to us in terms of delivering a meaningful effect. Charlotte mentioned the integrity of networks. Well, in our business, the integrity of the data, the integrity of the networks is pivotal for the sovereign nations, but also for the collective good of the intelligence operations in the alliance as a whole. So we place an awful lot of stores on understanding the risks and threats our networks are up to without getting into the details and the ones and zeros. We're also very much bound by an understanding of the efficacy and the legal framework within which we conduct intelligence operations. Espionage, you mentioned earlier, is as old as time. Sun Tzu writes about the context of using spies to bring about effect in terms of collecting information on our adversaries, wherever and however they may operate. We've transcended it to the 21st century where our collection of information and gathering of information and intelligence has now transcends an enormous panorama, a vast array of ints. We are dealing with cyber intelligence as one of a multitude of disciplines. Human intelligence, electronic warfare intelligence, signals intelligence, the list extends, of which now cyber has very much joined that community. So we welcome the opportunity to bring the cyber and the intelligence, particularly the intelligence communities, closer together Certainly within the Alliance, this is a realization, and we are now working closely. Ian and our respective teams are embarking with some pioneer work with the Joint Intelligence and Security Division in the headquarters to explore more effective ways of bringing these two communities together and ensuring that the experience, the hundreds of years of experience in intelligence particularly, are utilized to great optimum effect in the context of how we synergize cyber as one of a multitude of ints. So it's very much about the people, it's very much about the integrity of the data and the networks which we have to protect, and it's very much being cognizant of those legal protocols that we have to conform to in terms of the way we collect, manage, process and distribute and store in data. So I'm particularly pleased to be sat here with my professional hat on because it allows a realization of bringing cyber and the ISR communities closer together. And Ian and many in the organizing team know how hard we've tried to work to get august speakers to this fora to try and celebrate that. So if this is breaking the ice to bring those communities closer and closer together, I welcome that, and I'm certainly very pleased and honored to be on the panel this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. And if I start connecting dots, then I see that we are working on fighting against cyber attacks, cyber espionage. You're fighting as well against attacks, but also about any opportunity of crime, prevent that. So and you spoke about risk management, if we connect those dots, how can we meet the financial world, the military world, benefit from each other's, and especially maybe in the approach that you have to risk management? Charlotte, if I...
It's a big question, and in some way it's the ultimate question, because from Citi's perspective, we have 144 billion malicious and suspicious cyber events a year, and it's increasing. So when we look at how do we as a firm tackle that, partnering with government and other public sector agencies is key. But when we look at this, we've been doing it for decades. You know, FS Isaac, the idea for that was 1999. FS Isaac in the US then was launched in 2001. It's 2018, and we're still talking about improving information sharing. And one of the things that we can do as a partnership or in greater collaboration is actually work out how do we improve strategic information sharing. I think we're very good at the tactical information sharing, but we do need to take it up a level, and we need to look at much more of a medium and long-term view about what this means. We also need to make sure that firms, whether they're in public or private sector, understand what they do with the information they receive. Keeping with FS Isaac, and I'm sure if there's someone from FS Isaac in the room, they'll correct me if I'm wrong, there's around 7,000 members. Probably 80% of the information that's shared comes from 10 firms. Probably another 50 receive that information and can digest it and act on it. So you've then got a very large swathe of thousands of firms who are receiving this information, and they're either reading it and then deleting it, or they're reading it and looking at their screen in despair thinking, I have no idea what to do with this information. So when you look at the partnership question, we do need to work far more closely on actually making sure that we're helping firms use the information that's available. The second element, on top of your risk point, there are very common systems that we need to protect. So we need to understand what our critical assets are in the shared domain. A great example is the euro clearing and settlement system. So when you have a large bank such as Citi, or you have the European Central Bank and the other central banks that are part of that, and particularly the Target 2 system, if you have a savvy criminal who knows, and I'm saying it so hopefully they say they didn't hear it here, that between 3 to 4 p.m. UK time or 4 to 5 Central European time, that's the busiest time weekdays to settle and clear euros. And if they know that they just have to disrupt one of the banks, or, and this is really the third point, cause an event such that an institution uses one of its containment options, such as password reset, all the way through to segmenting and segregating a network or isolating a country, that actually that might stop that particular institution clearing and settling euros. You suddenly have a very visible event happening in the market, and whether people know it's a cyber event or not, it causes them to have uncertainty, question what's happening. It very quickly translates to the public domain. You then have the media speculation. So in a very simple way, you're causing actually a far more significant event than the actual cyber event itself may be. So understanding what the shared critical assets are, how we communicate about them, so are we identifying risks the right way? Do we have a shared risk registry? Because once we talk about risk and cyber in the same language, it makes collaboration far easier. And the last piece of cooperation that I would say is very important is moving to the recovery and response capabilities around our containment options. Do we understand what some of our containment options actually mean on a day-to-day basis? Because in many instances, the medicine might actually be worse than the disease or the illness that you're trying to fight. And in those instances, you have to have good government, intelligence agency, and regulator support to understand what is happening. So I will leave you those three,
Yeah,
but it's a big topic.
It's a big topic, and thanks especially for stressing the partnership approach. And I think also for the interest of the audience, we have the NICP, the NATO Industry Cyber Partnership, run by the agency. The general manager just signed a cooperation agreement yesterday with Indra company, and that is that's the aim, a trusted partnership between the agency and companies that run cyber business, that have situational awareness, that identify things happening, incidents happening, and we keep that information, of course, under confidence and as a trusted partnership, as I said, to get that exchange so that we do not learn about WannaCry and Petya from systems breaking down, but maybe if there's somebody in the world who suffers from that he can provide that information into that partnership, and everybody can then immediately build the walls and try to cope with that challenge. And I think that might be something where the financial sector and the military sector could as well go in that direction. So I think that's a good idea, especially for Ian managing that partnership, for the general manager to get in touch with you. Thank you for that. If we talk about attacks, then, and again, the big elephant in the room is attribution. And that's not only a technical issue, but at some point, if you're attacked, you get confident that you know who it was, and then you might see the need for some kind of action. And then the question is, how do I step beyond the legal borders in that? And then everybody looks at the legal advisors and say, can we do that? Is that fair? Is it good enough? So what's the missing piece in the legal framework? What's the trend? What you see as the upcoming, so to say, development in that sense or around that sense?
Well, when we think about thinking of NATO operations and developing of capabilities, I think the biggest challenge, the biggest elephant remains here, connecting our technical capacity or capability to actually conduct an operation with these broader perceptions and implications of geopolitics, deterrence, public image, and perception. And I think here what we need to take very seriously is this legal asymmetry that we are facing. So some states are getting away with sloppy cyber attacks or good cyber attacks better than the others. I think we are the others. And what I see is that in terms of this rule of law, in terms of having a clear understanding why and against what goals we conduct our operations is really important. Because when I look around, when I work with governments around the world, I sense a growing unease, both towards these capabilities and also this assumed right to conduct cyber operations. And I think we haven't had among countries a serious conversation about how international law actually applies to all these operations. And more importantly, doesn't anything in existing international law prevent the operation that we are sort of witnessing already between states? Because the question seems that many states are silently concluding that there is very little agreed between states that effectively defends them against these already ongoing peacetime cyber operations, which create these issues of trust and confidence. When we talk about cyber operations, intelligence operations, then it's known that international law is agreed to not provide any conclusive, actually, any answers against these operations. So when I say that we don't have clear guidance, I want to mention the Tallinn Manual. It has been linked to NATO. Some countries look at it as a NATO legal doctrine on this. Well, it is a piece of academic work. And we can't our governments, let our governments or allow ourselves to just point to Tallinn manual whenever a legal question comes up. Because it is guidance, it's a first word, but no government, close to no government is willing to say the last word. And I'm pretty sure that those last words, the state practice, will tell us something quite different. So we need to take it seriously.
Thank you on that. So if I hear all that stuff, at some point I have the problem following all that from understanding it, having the glue, what's happening, getting into the details is even more important. So this for me is something about in any kind of a career, a professional career, in any kind of life, you need to be up to speed with understanding those risks, finding the proper ways to handle that. Don't open this attachment. Don't do this with your professional computer in the office. So this is something where I would say it's another story of lifelong learning in order to cope with that development. And that, of course, Ambassador Excellence brings us again to the key question of how do we get 3,000 people in the agency, of course, maybe the one or the other IT experts amongst them, but in the armed forces, in society, in government, politicians, how do we get people understand the importance of that topic and open themselves to that kind of long life learning?
Yeah. If I may, before directly answer your question, only two very brief comments, because what you both said is extremely interesting. And I guess that the audience also feels that you said very important, you made very important remarks. On the financial dimension, the crisis in 2007, 2008 was a financial crisis, a banking, essentially, it started out as a banking crisis. The next financial crisis could very well be a cyber financial crisis. And we need to be prepared for that, because as we all know, the institutions, namely the European financial institutions, were not prepared to face the crisis when it erupted back in 2007, 2008, with the Lehman Brothers and the waves that it created for the European financial system. Are the European Union institutions prepared to face a financial cyber crisis? Probably not. So we need seriously to think about the financial consequences of that. Then, of course, there is the dimension of state-public interference in everything financially related, because we need simultaneously to have a sound, safe, secure cyber system that does not impinge on freedom of trade, on freedom of financial transactions, and everything that is really in the realm of the private sector as our economies and our democracies see it. Then a very important thing related to what you said. Yes, attribution is extremely important, and that immediately raises the question of deterrence and defense. How can we deter cyber attacks? What can we do in order really to create a doctrine that encompasses all the three NATO core tasks as defined by the strategic concept that still is valid, is still there, but is it serious to say that we have a deterrence dimension in what cyber attacks are concerned? That is a very big question mark. But sorry for this diversion, but I ought to also to comment on these very important issues. One of the main challenges that we are faced with is really to ensure the best possible coordination. You mentioned Tallinn, but of course Tallinn is not only the law, the regulations, what is being done, but also the Center of Excellence, the NATO Center of Excellence, that is extremely important, very well ahead of many other institutions inside NATO. And we look, when I think about the NCIA Academy in Oeiras, as a partner, a very close cooperation, complementary, coordinated partner when I think about the Center of Excellence in Tallinn. And the same applies to the newly created Cyber Operations Center here in Mons at SHAPE, in the context of, as we all know, in the NATO command structure adaptation. They will be real demanders of workforce, a very knowledgeable workforce. And if nations are going to provide the best possible workforce to this center of operations, as they should do, and I hope that Portugal will also abide by that very important dimension, we will be in a dire need for our own workforce in this domain. And there is where the Portuguese-based NCIA Academy could really play an important role. Because training, formation, education will go through that body being certified by NATO. And that could provide an invaluable asset for companies, for banks, for universities, for the industry in general, because a NATO certification is really key, is something that we should look as state-of-the-art certification. And in that sense, what we are also preparing to do in Oeiras, in a very close coordination with ACT in Norfolk, is also an example of the creation of these synergies. So this is a big endeavor, and again, it is nothing that Portugal alone can do. This is really a joint effort. That is the reason why we count so much on NCIA agency, but also in the expertise of the entire set of allies, and of course, as I said, this very close relationship with the European Union. But again, the point that I tried to make comment on about what Charlotte said, we need really to be very careful in order not to disrupt private sector, freedom of trade, the real building blocks of our democratic societies, because cybersecurity and cyber defense could also be very invasive of individual freedoms and individual rights. That is also a very important dimension to take into account.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. And of course, training is the way to understand what you need to know and then to learn about that. But to know the unknowns is that what we call what's the aim of cyber intelligence, to understand what the unknown is. So cyber intelligence is your domain. So how does that help, and how could everybody benefit from that?
Yeah, I think there's a number of key threads that have come from this, but mindful of the time, the moderator in me is watching this clock tick here.
No,
I'm invite the audience to...
It's interesting.
It's fascinating, and don't get me started because we'll be here way into the lunch period. Attribution is key, and you've touched on that thread for us in terms of NATO agreed intelligence. And as I mentioned in my previous comments, none of this is new for us in the intelligence context. This has been done in one form or another for centuries. We've now got a much more complicated dimension to deal with in the cyber context. Attribution and NATO agreed intelligence are key parts of what is in essence a 29-nation coalition. So gaining that trust, that understanding is key, and I think Charlotte used the word trust is fundamental to being effective in this space. But I've got a little quote here that I pulled out of a little research for a gentleman called Michael Warner, who talks about intelligence in cyber and cyber in intelligence. And he talks to the context of the blurring of lines between collection and intelligence operations have always been there. And they're there today as well in cyberspace activities. Both, he says, are inherently fragile and provocative, and we have to learn to perform cyber activities as we've historically learned to perform intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. That is, with professional skill, with strict compliance with the law, and with careful oversight and accountability. And I thought, uncoordinated, but we've found ourselves as an alignment of agreement in so much of what you have all said. So I'm going to pause at that point because I'm sure, and I see the questions flooding in on the app out of the corner of my eye here.
Yeah.
So I think that
or your iPad, then you want to go
your
back.
iPad,
No,
yeah.
that's not mine at this moment. So thanks to the audience. You posed some questions, so you might now listen to the answers, because don't think about additional questions. We will not have the time to address them. And I have the luck here to have not only a question, but a direct pointer to Eneken on that question. And that might be a quick one to answer. What forum do you see as being the most relevant forum initiative for promoting coherence and consultation on international law concerning the cyber domain? That's...
Well, NATO would be a good start, meaning that NATO cannot create its own bubble of international law. Given the tensions that there currently are about international law, if we can agree, that's a great step. But I would, for example, say that I can have a hard time imagining how all NATO countries would adopt this idea that sovereignty is not a legally protected rule.
Okay, thank you for that quick answer. And I have one question that goes to Charlotte, I'm pretty sure, although not addressed. Why are we much more permissive, legal side and enforcement, with cybercrime than with any other type of criminal activities? Another hour to spend on that topic.
I'll keep it brief. I think it goes back to many of the topics that we touched on earlier, and particularly some of the areas around attribution. It is very hard to actually track down a criminal and arrest them when it's a cybercrime, because often the crime crosses multiple borders. Very often the data center that might be impacted is holding the customer data, where the customer data is in a completely different country, and also the regulated entity or the regional or country HQ of the company in question might be in another part of the world. So until we can develop a better framework for coordinated case management and construction around cyber, and have states really agree to support the law enforcement agencies track down and arrest the criminals, it will be hard. And I know in the EU there are several developments around e-evidence and a proposal there. And that's really where we need to look. But it's very difficult. At the moment, fraud, for example, is a cost that's built into businesses' business model. We accept that there's a certain amount of US dollar fraud loss a year. What we try and do to combat that is just make it more expensive for the criminals to achieve. But if you think about a bricks and mortar bank, that took a lot of effort and planning. You know, someone had to get a getaway car, getaway driver, some form of weapon to scare the bank teller, and actually go in and do it, and there was a far greater chance that they'd be arrested. Now anyone with a connection to the internet and a laptop and a degree of savvy can try and steal money from any institution, so it is much harder. But the legislative proposals and the cooperation underway, I think we will start to see traction in improving our ability to counter the cybercrime.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Excellence. Apart from having the right students at a training entity, you also need to find the right people. And that's one question related to that. So how can we encourage cyber experts to either join NATO? How do we attract people to go on the track and becoming cyber experts? So it's even before starting the training to attract them. Is it about money, about careers? Is it about whatever, patriotism? Is that something we need to use? How can we move the right people to so to say, follow that path of becoming cyber experts?
Of course, they should be paid well. You mentioned money, of course.
Jim, can we pick that up?
That is an important dimension, obviously. But also, it is also extremely important that pursuing a career in the cyber domain should be seen as standing up for the defense of our fundamental values. And NATO is all about values. And the debate that we are witnessing now, for instance, in the context of the European Union political setting, is also a debate about values. And the transatlantic relationship is entirely about values. So standing up and being a part and parcel in this struggle for cyber protection, cyber security, cyber defense, is also to protect our values, the way of life that we are used to and that we believe there is no better, and that should provide enough incentive to be really a provider of cyber knowledge. Besides, of course, a good salary that would help a lot.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Matt, of course, you have a lot of work to do. You need a lot of people with proper expertise. So if you're running your interviews to find the best of the best, that's always selling the job as a very important one, a relevant one, an interesting one. So how do you manage that to attract people?
I would come off the back of the ambassador's comment. I mean, you fundamentally want people who have a passion for what they do and are connected and have a value system underneath it. It's not exclusively about being well remunerated, but of course that counts and helps enormously. And we recognize, certainly from where I sit, we're competing with a lot of industry partners who would very much like to have the same people. So I think, and again, back to that sort of context, nations have recruited and utilized spies in the context of gathering and processing and distributing information for centuries. So the principle of finding these people is not new. The motivations are intrinsically tied to what you believe in. I think your own value system will drive where you want to work and where you will get energy and strength from. So we are blessed with a very active recruitment campaign, and we recruit the best and the brightest across the 29 Alliance member nations. So it's not a problem for numbers. What we are looking to see, though, is diversity in terms of the staff that we recruit and we keep inside our team to reflect the challenges that we are faced with. In terms of cyber professionals, first of all, we need to understand what does that mean, what element, what context, and where are they. But inevitably, these are young, bright 20-somethings, not 40-somethings as a rule of thumb, and our targeted campaign from our recruitment needs to drive into that kind of genre, that age group, those technically astute, but also underpinned by some strong values in the beliefs of they're making a difference and contributing, in our sense, to the alliance.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. And I might take the opportunity as well. You know about the NCIA booth behind the glass wand, and there's not only experts in the cyber area helping you with information, but we also have our HR recruitment team over there, all the interviews that we have, all the recruiters, and there is an opportunity to get more information on this for you all the 3 days. So thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, let me wrap up, because in the interest of time, the good news is the clock just stops at 0, not showing in red numbers that we are increasing and going beyond the level. So this was an impressive panel from my view, a little bit challenging in order to have 4 experts from different dimensions, domains, looking from different angles. I believe it worked great. You were quite responsive, even to the questions. Perfect. Thank you so much. Ambassadors, ladies, Matt, thanks for following the invitation, participating in that panel. Thanks to the audience for being active in providing some questions. And I would welcome your applause for our panelists. Thank you so much.